Hello. All right. Let me know if you guys can hear me. I know it's Friday. Everybody wants to get a jump on the weekend. All right. All right. So in the last session on Monday, we had just finished doing the theming and styling, right? So we have the ability now to have, you know, have colors, right? So we can have different themes. So we can have like a light mode, we can have a dark mode if we want, stuff like that. Although we haven't, added the JavaScript in order to achieve that, we do have, the basics, already there. So all we have to do is just go in, add some JavaScript, and then we call it a day, and that'll take care of itself. But one thing that I kind of brought up was something called responsive design. Now, responsive design is, well, the following. You cannot control, I mean, I guess in a way you can, but you probably shouldn't. You can't control how a user is going to, look at your website. For example, you don't know what kind of phone they're going to have. You don't know if they're going to be seeing your website in portrait or landscape. You don't know if they're going to be using like one of those like super skinny phones, or they're going to be using a tablet, or if they're going to be on their computer, or heck, if they're going to see it on their TV, right? You really don't know. So one of the things that we have to do as web developers, which has been like this ongoing thing, is how do we design a website so that it works on multiple different screen sizes? Right? If we just had to, design something for iOS devices, it would be a lot easier because, well, the amount of screen sizes that there are for iOS devices is literally a handful. It wouldn't take you that long to actually enumerate over those screen sizes and make it work. However, on the Android side, there is a plethora of screen sizes. Okay? And, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, right? Everybody wants to have some like latest tech display. And so that's what Android manufacturers do. They give them some kind of crazy looking display, has like a really weird, aspect ratio. It's got, the screen sizes are different. It's crazy, okay? So it makes our jobs as web developers a little bit harder. However, what we can do is we can employ some safeguards, okay? So that, given a set of screen sizes, we're going to say it's going to look pretty good, right? Because there's no way that you can target the various screen sizes. There's just too many to enumerate, right? So at some point, you have to just be like, okay, let's just take some of the most, well-known screen sizes that are out there, and then let's design around those, right? We call these breakpoints. So Alex is asking, won't be able to type along because of arthritis, but I'll just be watching for now. Sure, no worries. Take care of yourself, buddy. So one of the issues that we have, for example, with this login screen is on desktop, it looks really good, right? This looks fine. Heck, if we had one of those ultra wide screens, I'm sure it would look just fine. It'd be right in the middle. But what happens when we start, looking at screen sizes? They're just starting to get a little bit smaller. For example, like let's say this is somewhere like a tablet, right? We're looking at the width here. Maybe this is like a tablet, right? And we start getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so far, you could probably make the argument that, hey, that looks pretty good, right? But then there comes a point, right, where this stuff starts to like not look so good. And then look at that, right? Now, I'm not saying, hey, make your website work for like 150 pixels width. You can see the width, pixel width right there. Right? I'm not saying you have to make it work for that, but you know, you should probably have your website work for at least, I think it's like 320 pixels is a good one. Um, you know, at least make it work for that. So if we look at something like, let's say, the iPhone 4, a lot of people will probably remember that. Look at the screen width. It's 320. Now, I'm not saying this is the one that you should look at. I'm just saying these are the screen sizes that exist. Now, I'm not entirely sure how many iPhone 4s there are out on the market, but you could do your due diligence and look around. Now, for example, let's look at the iPhone X. This has that really skinny screen, really long. That's 375. It's not so far off from an iPhone 4. And look how it looks, right? It doesn't look too bad, but I feel like we could do something better here, right? I feel like something could be done here. Okay. And then the other thing is, okay, so what happens if, like, let's say you're looking at an iPhone X and you think, hey, this looks pretty good. You know, let's just say that's what you were saying. And then they, you know, they flip it around. So now it looks like this. Does this look good? Right? You have to ask yourself, does this look good? And again, you know, this at this point we're talking about, you know, artistry, right? This is all artistic, so this is very much subjective. Okay. Does this look good? It looks okay. It doesn't look the best, right? It looks okay. But, you know, if I'm trying to be honest, I think this doesn't look as good as it could be. We're not utilizing, right? We're not utilizing the entire real estate of the screen, right? So there's some things that can be done differently here. So let's look at some examples. So let's go to like Twitter, for example. Let me log out of here real quick so we can look at what the let's look at how Twitter looks like. So let's go and type in where's the login? Here's the login screen. Okay, so let's click on that. So where's my login screen? Okay, so let's go back. So there's a bug on there. Can't hit login. Okay. Oh, okay, login. Okay, so use phone, email. Okay, yeah. So let's do that. Okay, so here's like, this looks very similar to what we have, right? Okay. So let's see what happens, right? Once we start to use something called responsive. So I'm gonna switch over to this responsive one and let's just see what happens as we start to collapse it. You can see things are changing a little bit. You can see this header here snaps down like that, and you got this situation, and so you can see what's going on here. So let's look at another one. Let's look at Instagram. Okay, so let's look at Instagram here. Okay, let's go to login. Okay, here this one probably looks closest to what we have. Let me switch this to responsive. Okay, we both have this card. They don't have a shadow. We have a shadow on ours. Okay, and yeah. All right, so let's see what happens as we start to collapse it. Okay, start to collapse it, and then, oh, look at that. It's no longer inside of a card. It almost looks like it switches views. So it's no longer trying to be like, you know, aligned vertically. It just takes up the top, just goes straight to the top, right? Because at this point it's thinking, okay, if you were on a phone, right? If you're on a phone, it's probably best that we have the inputs, you know, somewhere, you know, mid upper, right? Mid upper. So Instagram decided, hey, we're going to have it here. Okay, and so that looks pretty good. Okay, so you can see the design changes. So if you're on a tablet, it probably look like that. And then once you switch to a phone, it looks like that. So if we were like on a, let's say an iPhone 5, it looks like that. And then we go sideways, you get this. So it would look like that. Okay, not too bad. You have to scroll. If we were on the iPhone X, okay, this is what it looks like portrait. And then when we go sideways, it looks like that. Okay, so not too bad. So let's try and like mimic something that looks like this. Okay, now to get to this screen, that I had with the little phones and stuff. I think I showed this before, but just to refresh our memories, we right click, go to inspect, okay? And then if you're using Chromium or even like Firefox, right? Um, it should look very similar to this. You have these two options here. The one that has the device emulation, we can go ahead and click on that. And then you probably have more like something that looks like this. It'll probably say responsive. You can click on this drop down menu, and then you may not have all these devices. So to enable it, you just go all the way down, scroll, and then hit edit. And then here you can like, there'll be a bunch of them. You can enable the ones that you want to enable. You could also add a custom device. Okay, so the custom device is just going to be like, hey, I want to have, a custom width. Because essentially, we really don't care about the height, because if the height is, large or small, remember, on a website, we have the ability to just scroll, right? That's kind of a default thing. We have a scroll. What we care about is the width, right? We care about the width. So we got to make sure that our designs are based off widths and not heights. All right. So in this case, I have these ones that are my custom ones. Tailwind small, medium, large, and extra large. Now I think Tailwind has some new ones. Type in TailwindCSS. And if you go to the search part right here, there's something called breakpoints. You can actually look at which ones they have. So I guess they added this 2x 2XL. So maybe I can show you an example of how you would add a new breakpoint here. So I have up to XL. So I'll do add custom device. Device name. I'm gonna put this one to be sure 5. Call this Tailwind-2XL. And then for the width, it looks like it's going to be 1536 pixels. So I'll just type in 1536. Oops. So 1536. And for the height, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter for the height. I forgot what I put on these ones. But yeah, doesn't matter. We'll use 700. Okay, cool. So now I have a new one right here. This Tailwind 2XL. So I'll close out of here. And then now, when I go over here, I'll have this Tailwind 2XL. So that's what the Tailwind looks like. Okay. So where did I put the other ones at? Okay. So again, the height doesn't really, doesn't really matter. We just care about the width. Okay. So you can adjust these as you want. Again, we have the scroll feature. Okay, cool. So let me know if you guys have that. Go ahead and take the time to do something like that. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So let's try to emulate this. So how do we use these breakpoints, right? Like Instagram, right? We kind of want to like, Instagrams are really good. A really good example of kind of like what I want to achieve today. Okay, so let's click on this login and then like that. Okay, cool. I'm not sure why it's getting all skinny like that. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's start. So let's open up in our source under our screens. We'll start with this login page and let's see what we can do. Okay. So we want to use these breakpoints. So we want to say that in the login screen, let's look at Tailwind small. So I guess, 640 pixels. I guess we can say that, okay, if you're at 640 pixels wide, then we can say, okay, yeah, let's make it do this, right? Let's make it have, this card, but, let's switch over to, let's type in 640 pixels here. But then like anything below that, we're going to make this entire thing be the card, be the actual card, right? So we'll have no edges, there'll be no shadow, it'll just be the entire screen will just be this card, okay? So let's just try and do that. So if we're less than 640 pixels, so at 640, we're going to look like this. But anything below 640 is going to become like this whole thing will be white. So look at Instagram. When you get small enough, it turns like that. I don't know why it's looking like this. Oh, it's at 50%. Let me go to 100%. There we go. Let me refresh this real quick. Okay, so hit login. So for them, their breakpoint is around 400 and like, I don't know, 50 or something like that. So from here, you can see they have the card, just like us, we have a card. And then once you hit a breakpoint, the card's gone. Basically, the entire thing becomes its canvas, right? You just think about it like that, right? So the whole thing. And then on top of that, you'll notice that the content gets pushed up. It gets pushed up, right? It gets pushed up to the top. So first, let's try and get the view to become something like this, where we no longer have a card. So the edges here are going to be gone. So there's no card, and then we'll look at positioning. So let's just try and achieve that. So how do we do that? Well, the way breakpoints work in Tailwind is that when you define a breakpoint, okay, then it basically becomes a minimum. So if the screen size becomes this size and greater, do the following. Okay? Do the following. So it's not like only at this screen size. That's not the way it works. So it's going to be like, where's paint at? So it's going to be like the Tailwind breakpoints is a minimum value. So what do we mean by that? So let's say we have this ruler here, and then we have a series of breakpoints. Okay. So let's say this is like, I don't know, 640, and then let's say this one's 840, just say, and this one's 1024, whatever, okay? Then if you say, okay, at 640 pixels, which is Tailwind's, this one's Tailwind small, and then like, let's say this one's Tailwind's medium. I don't know the exact size for these two, but let's just say. And then there's one called large. I think this one's large. Okay. So if you were to say, okay, on small screen sizes, okay, do the following. Well, let's say we did like BG red. Let's say you wanted to be like, okay, if you're on a small screen, okay, if you're on a small screen, I want the background to be red. Let's say that was the case. Well, if your screen size lands, at least as far as the width concerns, lands in any of these values, so like let's say this is 0, so this is 0 pixels. So if your screen size lands between 0 and 639, it will not be red. But if your screen size is over here at somewhere like 860, let's say, then your screen will be red because the Tailwind sizes, the breakpoints, is a minimum value. So it has to be a minimum of this value in order for it to take effect. Okay? So that's how it works. So you can think of it like this. If you think of it like as a number line, it becomes like a solid dot, and the arrow goes that way. Here, this breakpoint is a solid dot, and the arrow goes that way. Solid dot, and the arrow goes that way. These breakpoints are what we call minimums. These are minimum breakpoints. So the smallest width that your screen can be in order for the styles to be applied is the following. In this case, Tailwind 640, 840, 1024. Okay, so that's what we mean. So let's try that. So I'm gonna stay here at 540, and just to, make this clear, I'm gonna say on small screen sizes, so for Tailwind, okay, we have these breakpoints. So that we have SM, medium, MD, LG for large, XL, and then 2XL. And then these are the widths. Notice that the media queries are these min widths. They're min widths, they're minimums, okay? So as an example, let's say, so this is the div, so this is this background, the entire background. I'm gonna say that for small screen sizes, colon, I want the background to become red. And for us right now, we might think, well, this is a small screen size, right? So it should apply. Well, let's save and see what happens. All right, well, we saved and nothing happened. So why is that? Well, if we hover over what SM is a min width of 640 pixels. What's the width right now? It's 558. So it's a minimum. The width must meet that minimum threshold for the style to be applied. If it's something smaller, it will not be applied. That's what we mean by it's a minimum breakpoint. So now if I start to increase the size, we're getting closer. Once we hit 640, all right, let me get that out of the way, and then boom. You see now it turns red. Go a little bit smaller, the red goes away. Now it's red, now it's not. So if we hit 639 pixels, it's not red. If we change this to 640, now it's red. Remember, it's a minimum value, right? It's a minimum value. All right, yeah, I saw the updated Figmas. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so does that make sense, everybody? What we mean by the Tailwind breakpoints are minimums. So you have to meet that threshold, okay? And then once you meet it, then those styles get applied. So if you don't meet the threshold, the style does not get applied. So you can actually use this to your advantage. For example, I want, air quotes, I want the default style to look like this. I want it to look like this, no card. But then once we hit a certain breakpoint, like small devices, we want it to be a card, let's say, okay? We want to follow this Instagram looking thing. Okay, so let's try it. So how do we do that? Well, first, we basically need to redesign how we laid out our HTML. Now, recall what Tailwind is. Well, so let's click on the home of Tailwind. So Tailwind is a utility first CSS framework, but it's also something called mobile first. So mobile first. I guess they don't have it here anymore. But what we mean by mobile first, I think if I type in the breakpoints, actually, if I go back to here, and I think they talk about that. What we mean by a mobile first approach, so Tailwind takes a mobile first approach. What we mean by that is that you should actually be designing your websites with mobile in mind. So what does it look like when your website is on a device that looks like this? So you should design for that and then slowly work your way up to bigger and bigger screen sizes. You should not start at, okay, let's design the website like how it's going to look on a desktop. Then let's try and backtrack our way to make it look like how it's going to work for mobile. Tailwind says you shouldn't do that approach because Tailwind has a mobile first approach. Basically, it means you should be designing for your mobile devices and then slowly start working your way up. That's how Tailwind is designed to be used like. So it's not designed for you to focus on desktop and then work your way backwards to smaller screen sizes. It's meant for you to focus on smaller screen sizes and then work your way up to bigger screen sizes. So our initial approach here, right, we were just working on a desktop view. We didn't even think about mobile yet. But what I'm saying is now we need to look at mobile. And so the unfortunate part is some of our HTML needs to get gutted because we didn't take a mobile first approach. So we might have to rearrange some of the HTML in order to make it work with Tailwind. It's a possibility, but we'll see. The screen is simple enough that I don't think we'll have that big of a problem, but you never know. Okay. So first thing we want to do is we want to get rid of this card. Now the card is being defined here in this div. This div is the card. Okay, this is the card right here. We have this fixed width and we have this fixed height. So let's try and change that. Okay, how can we change the width and the height? Well, we only want it to become a card once we reach that threshold, right? So how can we fix this? Well, all we need to do is say, well, once you hit the small screen size, I want you to become a width of 96 and a height of 96 because we want it to look like this. So first let's prefix our styles here of styling the card to become this card, okay, with the SM breakpoint. So now if we hit save, okay, something happened. Something happened. It's no longer going to be, you know, this width and height. However, once we hit 640, it does. You see that? It does. So what do we want this div to actually do then? Well, if we want this to take up the entire screen, that means that this card actually needs to take up the entire screen and then become small. So we want to expand it, and then once we hit smaller screen size, quote SM breakpoint 640 pixels, so as the screen starts to get smaller, then we want to compress it. So how do we do that? Well, just set the width to be full and the height to be full. Right? We want to take up the entire screen, and then once we hit a breakpoint of SM, which is 640 pixels, then we want to start to compress. So let's see what happens when we make the card a width of full and a height of full. Okay, look at that. So now if you're on a smaller screen size, it's going to look like this. And then once you hit a breakpoint, 640 pixels, you become a card. Look at that. This is looking something like this. Okay, there's still some stuff we need to do, but we're getting there. Do you see what I'm saying? Does this make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? So this is what Instagram does, and this is what we do. We go from here to here, from here to here. See that? That's all we're doing. Very cool, right? Now, let me pull up this Figma here. Is it on here? Yes, it is. Okay. So check it out. Here is our, so right now we're focused on the login page. This is what our login page looks like for relatively large screen sizes. So Victoria quickly did this. So we want our login page to actually look like this. So we want it to look like this when you're on a mobile. And then as your screen size gets bigger, you know, like let's say a desktop, it should look like this. Obviously, you can tell that we need some work, right? So what should the screen sizes look when you're in between these two sizes? Portrait, mobile, small screen, and then a bigger one. There might be some enumeration that needs to be had here, right? Like, okay, so what happens in between small mobile portrait and then like large desktop screen? Does there need to be like some design changes to fit those in betweens? And again, that depends on the screen. Okay, for this login page, it may be the case that just having these two designs is good enough. But what about when you have something like this that's a little bit more complex? Then you have to start thinking, okay, maybe it's not going to be enough to just have, I believe there was one here. Yeah, right here. It may not be enough to just have a small screen size here and then all of a sudden become large. That may not work, right? You may need to have something designed specifically for mobile, and then something for tablet, and then something for desktop. So the tablet is like the in-between. It's not as large as a desktop, but it's not as small as a mobile phone. It's like the in-between. So most times when you're making a design, you need to think like that, right? It's like, okay, at least you should have 2 wireframes, one for mobile, one for desktop, and then a third one could be for like tablet. What should it look like if you're on a tablet? That may be something you might need to have. The tablet, it may not be the case, but maybe it is. And if you want to be even have finer detail, finer control, you might have like 3 or 4 different wireframes for different widths. Okay, we call these our breakpoints. All right, so we're going to try and make our login page look like this, and then somehow with some Tailwind magic, when you reach a certain threshold, it'll look like that. Okay, so let's try and get this done. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to need to push the content up. But before we start doing any kind of like pushing of repositioning of any content, let's try and get the simplest things done. Let's try and get this SVG to be in the middle when it's here, and then go back to being on the left when we hit that breakpoint. So let's try that. Let's try and see if we can get this to be in the middle. So here's the logo. Okay, here's the logo. Now, how do we get this to be in the middle? Well, this logo, keep in mind, is just an SVG. So if we look at it, it's over here in this container. There it is. It's just an SVG. Okay, it's just a regular HTML element. It's not an image, it's an SVG. So what we can try is, we can try to see if we can center it using something like the MX Auto. Let's see if we can center it using MX Auto. Hit save. Okay, that worked. Okay, so done, right? We got it in the middle. So that was pretty easy. Now, but what happens when we go back to here? We want it to go back to the left. So how do we do that? Well, we got to say, okay, well, when we hit a certain breakpoint, we need MX to be, there's no none, but there is a 0. So let's get it to be 0. So when we're here, now it's back to the left. Okay, so but when we're here, we're in the middle. And then when we're over here, we're on the left. See how this is working? Okay, this is why you have to take a mobile first approach, because there's so many like weird things that's going to pop up, right? Trying to get some of these things to work. So you should always design things with mobile first if it's the case that your audience is going to be using it on a mobile phone, and then start to scale up. All right, so we have some stuff working. Okay, cool. So the next thing is, it seems like there is a lot more spacing. So I'm just looking at the Figma. Okay, there seems to be a lot more spacing now between this login portion. So between this and this, there seems to be a lot more spacing. So how can we increase that spacing? Well, the current spacing that's allowing that to happen is on here. It's on the card using the space Y. Where is that at? Okay. All right, so here we're not actually doing that. We're doing it using MY8. So we're actually pushing things away from us. Okay, that's what this MY8 does. So if I remove that, let's fix that. So if I remove that, you're going to see things get squished. However, I can fix that. Here's my container. Here's my container. If I use space Y and I do an 8, I'll have the same spacing again. Now, the difference between this is that at the container level, remember, here's the div. So this is at the container level, and these are the children. The container is telling all the children, hey, I need you guys to give each other space. I need you guys to give each other this much space. Okay, space dash Y dash 8. That 8 has a specific pixel value. I think you take the 8 and you multiply it by 0.25, and that actually tells you how many pixels, if I'm not mistaken, I believe. So if you take 16 and you multiply by 0.25, you get 4 RAM. So from 4 RAM, if you multiply the 4 if you multiply each rem, I believe by 16, you get the pixels. So 16 16 times a quarter times 16 will get you the pixels if you care about that. That's the conversion. I think you can skip one of the divisions. I think you just multiply by 16. I think that should get you. 16 times 16 is 64. It might work. I'm not sure. What is 80 times? But I don't know. Anyways, doesn't matter. Okay, so at the container level, we're telling the children to space each other apart. When we had it over here on this div, we were telling, basically this child was basically fighting with its sibling and saying, hey, get away from me. So there's a difference between having your parents tell everybody, you know, hey, give each other some room, versus you telling your siblings, get away from me. So by putting it here at the child level, using this space, using my, not space, but my, meaning the margins, you're telling your siblings to get away from you. But at the container level or the parent level, the parent's basically telling the children, hey, give each other some room, right? So you can kind of think of it that way. All right, so that's it. That's what we did here. But the problem is, again, on the Figma, there seems to be way more spacing when it's on this portrait mode, right, on mobile, versus when you're here. So there's two different spacing levels. So we have the spacing level when we're supposed to be here in a card form. So we need to add some extra spacing when you're here. So how do we do that? Well, we need to say, okay, we want this spacing to happen only once you are at the small breakpoint and greater. So if we do that, then you'll notice that it gets collapsed because the spacing style is no longer being applied because we haven't met that threshold, because the breakpoint is a minimum breakpoint. So you have to hit what SM is, which is 640 pixels and greater. So only once we hit the 640 pixels do we get the spacing that gets applied. But before then, no spacing is applied because we haven't defined a spacing. So what you can do is you can say, okay, the default spacing will become space Y, and then let's try a bigger number, like let's say 16. So get some nice good spacing. Okay, I think that might be it. I think I actually hit it on the first try. So you can see here, there's like this grand spacing when you're in the mobile version like this. But then once you hit the desktop, it looks like it collapses a little bit. That could be my eyes. No, it's not. Okay, it's definitely it. Okay. So now this is what it looks like when you're on a mobile phone and you're holding it. And then, like, let's say you go and you switch over to your tablet, it's going to look like that. Okay, perfect. Very good. Very good. Now you might notice that there's some lag. That's because like I'm currently trying to format a drive and it's taking forever because it's like almost 2 terabytes. Okay, so the lag is on me. All right, but let's try it. Let's try it out. So let's look at an iPhone 5. So this is what it looked like on an iPhone 5. That looks really sweet. That looks really sick. And then if like for some reason we go horizontal, it's gonna look like this. Okay, not too bad. Okay, not too bad. We might have to fix some stuff. For example, we haven't taken into account that this thing is on a border. So maybe we need to add some padding on the y-axis. Now you can't really tell when we do it like this because we're actually centering this vertically. But once we do this, you know, there's only so much screen real estate and we're trying to align ourselves vertically. Well, it looks like the content is actually larger than the height now. So we have this really weird thing going on. So we're gonna have to fix that. So we're going to address that once we get to positioning. But this looks pretty decent. My only problem with this is that currently we are actually adding some padding on the left and the right, okay? The issue with that is on a smaller screen size, you really don't need to add too much padding on the left and the right because you already have a small screen. Why are you trying to make it even smaller, right? So it makes sense when we're here because we're trying to make it fit this little card. But when you're on a phone, right, and it's like this, you see what the padding is doing now? The padding is squishing everything to hell. So we actually need to get rid of the padding, but only apply it when we reach a certain, a certain width. All right, so how do we do that? Well, the padding, I believe, is being applied at at the card level. So what we can actually do is we can set it being like, okay, on the small pixel screen size, we will add 16 pixels. So of padding. So now there's no padding. So no padding is being applied. But once we hit the small breakpoint, which is 640 pixels, now we have the padding. Beautiful. Now, the question now becomes, should we add the padding to the card? Remember, this is the card. Or should we be adding the padding at the most root level, which would be here, right? Because regardless of what you have, right? Regardless of what you have around, should we have padding? See, this is starting to get kind of tricky because we kind of cornered ourselves by taking a desktop first approach. Now we have to like backtrack and think, okay, should we be adding the padding at the root level or at one of the child levels? So what makes the difference there? Well, right now this screen is way too simple to actually have a good example. But we'll probably address that issue once we get to something a little bit more complicated, when you actually have more than one widget on your screen, like this. For right now, this is just way too basic to actually even draw a good example, but I'm just letting you know that that's something we need to think about. So just let that fester in your head and think about it. Should we be adding padding at the root level, or should we be adding it at the card level? That's a choice that we're going to have to make. So for right now, we're going to add the padding at the card level. Okay, we're going to add it at the card level. Okay. So when we're here, this seems to be a bit too, how do you say, a bit too cramped, right? So we want to have some padding here. So we do want some padding, we just don't want that much padding, okay? Originally the padding was 16, that's quite a lot of padding. So let's try and add, let's start off with like, let's say 4 pixels. We'll start off with 4 pixels and see what that looks like. Well, not really, yeah, it's not 4 pixels, it's 1 rem. Multiply that by 16, that's 16 pixels. Okay, so now we have some spacing. Now again, this spacing stays the same because it's not like it's a slinky or some kind of like, some kind of spring where like it'll get bigger, more spacing will be added as you grow. No, we need to explicitly state, hey, add more pixel as it goes along. Now, once we reach here, you're going to get that 16 pixels on either end, okay? But at this point, it just stretches. Now let's look at Instagram. Instagram has a more conservative breakpoint. They're using like 400 and something, I think 450. Yeah, it's 450. So at 450, they're saying, okay, this is the last pixel that we consider it to be a small screen, like a mobile phone. At 451, you're something bigger, right? You're something bigger. So you're like, let's say, maybe you're on a mobile phone, but now you're in landscape, not portrait mode. So, okay. So they have a more conservative breakpoint. Ours is a little bit more looser. It's more liberal, I guess you could say. Because we're just going off of Tailwind, and that's 640 pixels. That's a pretty large screen. Now, if you think about it, the iPhone X, which is kind of like probably one of the more dominant phones out there for iOS, probably this iPhone X is screen size is just 375 pixels in width. It looks great here. I think it looks, maybe we could add a little bit of padding. But the problem is like when we get to something like, let's say, say like the iPhone 5 or iPhone 6. Look at the iPhone 6. This is starting, this looks okay. It's like a pixel 2x, yeah, I guess maybe maybe it looks fine. Maybe it doesn't look too bad. Maybe I'm thinking more of this than it has to be thought of. What do you guys think? Do you think this looks good. Again, this is very subjective. I can't really say for sure. You know, um, I guess if you're on a smaller screen size, it would look really good. Like this still looks good. I just feel like as you start getting a slightly bigger, it starts to look just like, it almost looks like this website was not designed for this particular screen size. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like nobody gave this screen size any thought. So it's like, okay, it just looks like a skinny version of the website, but stretched to hell, right? That's what this gives me. That's the vibe that I get from this. That's why I feel a little, you know, concerned about this right here. This right here. Um, so in order to fix this is that, we can just introduce a smaller screen size. So let's actually do that. I'm trying to remember if, okay, did not. All right, but we can add some extra screen sizes. You see here, we can actually extend the breakpoints. So I'm going to introduce a new one because I feel like the small from Tailwind is just too big. It's too big. Because here it looks great, but there comes a point where it just feels like it's just a stretched version. Okay, so we want to have another breakpoint. Somewhere around here needs to be a breakpoint because this starts to look kind of terrible. So what we can do is with Tailwind, with such a beautiful, framework, is that we can actually extend the screen size. So we can introduce our own. So let's do that. Let's go over here to Tailwind and let's introduce a new screen size. So we go to extend. Here we already had an example of extending the colors. Now I just want to extend the screens. So we say screens, and I'm going to introduce a new one called XS for extra small. So at the extra small, now we just have to pick. Again, this is a very subjective value now. We have to pick, okay, what's a good breakpoint to have? And I'm thinking, based off this, maybe 400 and, maybe 450 might be a good one. So we can start with there and then see how that looks like. So I believe that at 450 pixels, we should introduce a new breakpoint. That's my argument. Because I want it to be like, once you hit 450 pixels, we need to add some more padding because this is starting to look kind of stretched, right? That's basically what my argument is. All right, so now it's reloaded. So now we have a new breakpoint that we have available. So all I'm saying is that at these smaller screen sizes, which is the default, because I have no breakpoint, in front of this, so this is just going to be the default that rolls over for all screen sizes. So for all screen sizes, I want it to be 4 pixels. Okay, that looks fine. But then we get to a point where I just think it's starting to look like it's just a stretched version. Okay, I don't feel like the phone that I'm using, nobody cared to give it a second thought and have the website look nice. But, I care about the person's experience using the website, so I'm introducing this new breakpoint, XS, for extra small. So at extra small, all I'm saying is that instead of 4 pixels, maybe we increase it to like 8 pixels. Get a little bit more, Look at that. So now here we're at 4 pixels, and now at, maybe we can even go a little bit higher. Let's go to like let's try 10. Again, these values are subjective. Okay, that looks nice. Okay, so here we're at the very, very small. We're at a pixel of 16 pixels, and then at 10, we're going to switch over to 40 pixels. So that's quite a difference. And then, so we're going, and then at 450, pa-bam, and that carries over. And then eventually at 640, we snap. They're like, okay, the screen at this point is too large. Let's switch to a card. Okay. Now, if you're worried about the pixels, right? If you're worried about the pixels, like padding. You can achieve this using padding, but as you can see, it's still not perfect. It's still not perfect. Okay, using the pixels is still not perfect. So what can we do instead of using, you know, these pixels? Instead of using pixels, what else can we do to achieve this same effect? Okay, and the answer to that is to actually give the content that you have a maximum width. Give it a maximum width. So here it's just like, okay, the width, this is fine, width is fine, width is fine. But at some point, I don't want this content to grow anymore. Instead, I want it to stay that size, and then I just want to center it. So how can we achieve that? Well, here at this level, okay, at this level, we have this width of full and h of full, okay? Because we're saying, hey, I want this entire background to be white. I want this to be the card. And then eventually the card will collapse and become that, okay? Now the issue is that what I want to do is I want the content to be no larger than this, and then I want to center it. So even if I grow it here, the content will never be larger than like, well, I think it was like 340 pixels, and it'll just auto center. So it's almost like the padding on the left and the right is dynamic. But we're going to achieve that using a margin. But we now have to restructure our HTML in order to allow us to do something like that. So in the card, we're going to introduce a new container. So this container right here, so I actually don't want to do that. So we'll do it like that. I want to put a comment in here. Okay. So this container is the content container. So there's a difference. Here we have a wrapper, and then this div over here, this div right here, was our card. This gave us the styling. So this was our card container. Okay, let me make this screen full screen size so we can look at the different divs now. So this div right here, so I'm going to copy and paste this comment. So this div right here is our screen container. Okay, this is our screen container, contains everything. And then here we have a wrapper. This was just a little hack in order to vertically align our content. So this is a wrapper just to vertically align our card, specifically the card here. And then this div, right, we have to go over here. This is our actual card container. You can tell that because this is our surface, right? It has a BG surface. In this case, it's this white thing right here. If we get larger here, it's this white thing. That's what this container is. That's what this one is. What I'm arguing is that we should introduce a new container to actually hold the content. This way, this container, we can actually add a width constraint to never get bigger than something, and then we can center that within the card. So what do I mean by that? So let's take this and let's move it into here. Okay. So some things need to change. For example, the padding, probably not the padding, but the spacing, for example, the spacing between the children will actually need to be now at the content level because this is the card container. So this now needs to be on the content container. Like that. Okay. Let me show you what happens if we don't do that. So I'm going to hit save. So you'll notice that here, now there's no spacing. There's no spacing. Okay. So we need to introduce the spacing at the content level. So we're going to introduce the spacing at the content level. So we still have our spacing. Okay, so we still have our spacing. So that's good. Okay, what else? I feel like the pixel, the padding now should not be on the card itself, but inside of the container that contains our content. So I think the padding should now be here. Okay, so now again, nothing here looks very different. It all looks still the same. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce some padding here like it was before, which is once you're in the card, we have some padding. Beautiful. That's what we want. But I want this content to never grow larger than, I'll pick a number. Let's say this number. This looks good. I don't want the content to ever be larger than this. So how do I achieve that? Well, here's the content container. So I don't want the actual content to ever be larger than something. So here I'm going to say max W and then pick a number. Okay, so here's extra small. That's a good one. 320 pixels, that sounds really good. Now notice what happens. The content is no longer getting wider than 320 pixels. So for here, you actually can't tell the difference, right? It's like, okay, it's growing, it's growing, it's growing, it's growing. Ah, it stopped growing. But see, now we have a problem. It's no longer in the center. So how can we center it? Well, now that we have a max width, let's just add a MX auto. Let's center it now. Boom, now it's centered. See that? That looks really good. See here, it's like it's able to shrink and grow. But then now we have this MX auto. And then all of a sudden it goes like that. Look at that. Now I think the XS might be a bit too conservative. So let's go with small, 384 pixels. So let's make it a little bit larger. And then let's see here. Where is the so the width? Okay, so let's remove this for now, real quick. Just want to see what happens. Okay. Okay. So I think what we're going to need to do is once we add this, we might need to add a width full here to make sure we're taking up the entire width. There we go. Because once we introduce a maxed width, then the width here starts to actually collapse a little bit. So what we need to do is, in order to get this thing to still be springy, so we actually want the width to change a little bit, but we just don't want it to ever get larger than this width, see? Because now it doesn't look all funky, okay? So what we need to do is we need to say, set the width to be 100%, but then tell it, don't grow any larger than, I think we can actually use XS. Let's use extra small, because I think that looks better. That looks clean. That looks really nice. Okay. So we're going to say that the width should never grow larger than extra small, which is 320 pixels. And then at some point, our breakpoints kick in, and now we're back to a card. Okay? But when this happens, we want all of this stuff to go away. We want all this stuff to go away. So for example, so once we hit small, we want MX auto to go away. So we want that to be 0. So you just like go away. We want the max width to go away. So we got to say at small, we just want the max W to be, switch it to none. So no max width, take up the rest. So there we go. Now we fixed it. Okay. So here we go on a small screen size. We'll fix the padding. So we got to introduce some padding. And then, hey, look at that. Max width. Let's go. And then snaps. See that? Beautiful. So these smaller screen sizes like this, we should introduce some padding. Okay. So I want to keep the same styling next to each other. So I'll put the padding over here. It doesn't really matter, but I just want to make it be the same. So I'll do a px of 8. Let's try that. Let's see if that's not too squishy. Okay, that looks good. So px of 8. And then eventually we get the max width. And then the padding will change to fit. Maybe px4 might be better. Okay, so we go. So we have our little margin. Our margins is auto centering, and then we have some slight padding. It's not touching the edges. Okay, so there we go. So we have this. Okay, and it's okay that it acts like that, right? Oh, one part we haven't fixed is that we want to make sure that we actually have no shadow, we have no roundedness in the case that we're not a card. We want to get rid of that. In fact, you can actually kind of see it here. There's the roundedness. So we got to get rid of that. So we can get rid of that at the card level. This is the card level. So you want to say we only want to introduce a shadow when you're at the small screen size. Small screen size, we have our shadow. And only when you're at the small screen size do you have that roundedness. Okay, so that's gone now. Now if we go like this, we don't have any of that roundedness that you can actually see here. There's no shadow. The shadows will only be applied once we have a card. And so that is a small introduction into responsive design. You can see. Now, we haven't hit everything on the Figma, because on the Figma, we also have some spacing between here. But we'll save that for Monday. So hopefully that gives you an idea of like how you should think about these things. And then how you can use Tailwind to levy some of the designs that you actually want to have, and then make a really good looking responsive website. Okay, so look at that. So look what we have achieved now. So for some funky small, I think if you have 320 pixels, if it looks good on 320 pixels, I think you're solid. Finally, this thing formatted. Okay, good. Cancel. Close. All right. So if you have a small screen size, 320, if it looks good here, I think you're solid. So if it looks good for 320, call it a day. I think that's good enough. Anything smaller, just say, hey, our website's not made for really small screen sizes. But here will look good. Here it looks good. Good. It looks all good. And hey, look at that. Boom. At one point, you're just like, okay, there's too much white space, right? Let's do something different. And that's when we introduce a card. Very cool. So let's see what it looks like on an iPhone X. So this is what it looks like on an iPhone X. It looks really nice. You go horizontal, landscape mode. It looks like this. We need to fix this because the card looks a little funky here, so we might need to fix this. But overall, I think it looks really good. I think it looks really good. Okay. So with that, I'm going to close this session. I said we're going to go up to 7 o'clock, and it's only because I want everybody to attend, if you guys can, if you have the time, attend this workshop here, talk about resumes and how to write a good resume. And that the one-page resume is a myth, right? And a lot of people used to tell me, hey, put your resume on one page. And I always said, like, I don't think it matters. Like, I just have things I need to say on my resume, right? And I never had an issue getting an interview. I just had an issue landing the damn job. Too qualified for some, not qualified for other ones. But anyways, please attend this. I will link this onto the YouTube. That way you guys can quickly switch over. So please attend this. I'm going to head over there right now. I'd like to watch it. And yeah, so with that, I will see you guys on Monday. And I'll see you guys on the Polyglot YouTube channel. All right. Bye, everyone.